for inviting me to be here. I really appreciate the invitation to come speak. These are two really great organizations that seem to be organizing what's, I hope, going to be a really great series of events. And so my name's Alex Levy. I'm the CEO and lead designer at a company called MyVoice, and we make technologies that help people with speech disabilities. And over the last 2 years, since we were founded in April 2011, we've helped give a voice to thousands of kids and adults with speech disabilities. And in the few minutes I have here, I'm going to tell you about our story so far. I'm going to cover a couple quick things. First, I'm going to tell you how we got into it, why it is that we're doing what we're doing, who it is that we're doing it for. I'm going to tell you what we created in order to address the problem of speech disabilities and communication disabilities around the world. I'm going to tell you the impact that it's had, so a few of the stories of our users, and then more broadly what it's done for our thousands of users around the world now. And then finally, leave you with a couple lessons we think we've gleaned from our first few years in operation that maybe will be useful in your own social enterprises and your own projects in the future. So I'm going to tell you why we got started. Started at the University of Toronto. We were all researchers in the computer science department when we became interested in the topic of people with speech disabilities. And it's a pretty diverse population, and a pretty large population too. It's about 3.5 million people in North America that have a speech or language disability. And I'll give you a few examples so you can sort of picture what I'm talking about. One example might be nonverbal children on the autism spectrum. Another might be kids and adults with cerebral palsy, adults who have aphasia, which is a language disability because the part of their brain responsible for language was damaged by a stroke or traumatic brain injury. Neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and ALS. So when people tend to think about disability and accessibility, they often picture physical accessibility in terms of wheelchairs and ramps and buses. But actually, this population is roughly twice the size of the population in North America that uses wheelchairs, and the numbers are even greater worldwide. Now, this statistic on its own was quite interesting, but it was actually a second statistic that we came across as researchers that really got us into the work. And that is, a number of studies asked, of people with these types of communication disabilities, how many use today a communication aid that can speak out loud? In other words, so that they can be understood and heard out loud, like you or I. And the answer, the consensus figure, was less than 1 in 10 in North America. So 90% did not have a communication aid that spoke out loud. So for us, we started thinking, by contrast, what if this was the case for wheelchair users? If 90% of people with mobility disabilities had no access to a wheelchair, I mean, there would be people picketing constantly at Queen's Park and on Parliament Hill and in local governments if this was the case. But it isn't the case. There's great adoption for mobility technology, at least in North America. So we went out and we looked, well, what were the products out there that people were or weren't using, as the case may be? This was one end of the spectrum. These are traditional communication aids. And if you can believe it, these communication aids cost between $5,000 and $15,000 a unit. They're extremely expensive. Now, one would hope that that gives you a really great product, but the truth is, not all, but many of these were very difficult to use. The one in the middle there has 104 buttons. It's pretty intimidating. But they actually effectively had very low rates of speech because their interfaces weren't that well designed, and they had technologies that had really been stagnant for the last 10 years. So that's one end of the spectrum, the high-tech end of the spectrum. On the other end, we have this. This is the world's most common communication aid. It's paper. We often joke at the company that if Staples were an assistive technology company, it would be the most successful assistive technology company. And this is what a lot of families use. If they have, say, a child or a family member that has a speech disability, they'll take words and phrases and they'll put them in a paper book or binder and ask them to point. Very straightforward, very effective, works with or without batteries. It's a great system from that perspective. But it's not very flexible. And most importantly, it can't be heard out loud, which means you can't speak up in class. You can't tell somebody, for example, what their change is if you're working, let's say, at a counter. You can't have a phone call using this. So we wanted to do something that kind of sat between these two. We wanted to develop products that could flip this graph around, more or less. That could make it so that it was only the very tiny fraction of people that didn't have access to a communication aid, and the vast majority that did. So we knew we had to address these two problems, these problems of cost and of complexity and ease of use. So that's what we set out to do. So let me show you what we created. We've got two great product lines. These are apps that run on commodity hardware like iPhones and iPads. One is Talk Rocket Go. That's the app that we started with, our flagship app. And it's an app, as you'll see in a second, that has words and pictures and phrases that people can choose from and a series of technologies that make it very fast to communicate. And the second is a product line that we just came out with actually in January called Rocket Keys. And this is a flexible and accessible talking keyboard. Let me show you some of the pictures of what these look like. This is Talk Rocket here. You can see we've got pictures on the left-hand side, phrases in the middle there, and people can touch these in order to have them spoken out loud. But we've got a series of great features that I'll show you in a second that make it even faster to communicate. This is Rocket Keys. Rocket Keys is a flexible keyboard that lets you put the keys anywhere you want, make them any size. And in addition to that, you can use it very effectively even if you have severe physical disabilities. So if you have a tremor or weakness or paralysis in your hands, we have affordances that let you use it. If you have a cognitive or language disability, we have a prediction engine that can predict the full sentence you're trying to express. We also have some other great technologies which we think have been pretty crucial to it. The first was a design. This was an opinion that we formed really early on in the work, and that is that design for people with disabilities should look as good or better than the design on commodity apps and hardware that's used by a mass market. So it's often the case that when you look at technologies for people with disabilities, they scream, this is a technology for people with disabilities. They're generally speaking not very attractive, and some of them also look very childish. And this can be very challenging because people with speech disabilities do not necessarily have a cognitive disability. And so people felt, I don't want to use a communication aid because it makes me look silly, or it makes me look unintelligent. I'd prefer people not make those judgments. Our apps have great design that's colorful and fun and engaging, which is great for children, but is also very polished and easy to use, which makes adults attracted to it. We had great technologies like our place-based vocabularies. This was a mechanism we came up with to speed up communication that could detect the user's location and then bring up relevant words and phrases automatically. The classic example in Canada is you go to Tim Hortons and it brings up Timbits and Double Double. If we were in the States, the example would be Starbucks and a latte, for example. But it makes it a lot faster to communicate. We developed a series of online support tools. This is Supporter Studio, our website, where you can go on and you can see what appears on an end user's communication aid. And this lets a teacher or a clinician or a family member, or all three of them working collaboratively, customize someone's communication aid without taking it from them, without transferring files, and without having to worry about backing it up. So we've got teachers that will work at home in their pajamas, sipping a glass of wine, watching Grey's Anatomy, and by the time they get there in the morning, all of their students have this ready to go on their device. We also really wanted to target physical accessibility, so make it accessible to use a touchscreen even if you had physical challenges. A lot of our users have speech and physical disabilities. So for example, if you have cerebral palsy that affects speech, you may also have difficulty controlling your hands in as precise a way as a typical user. And so we have technologies that make it so that you can use touchscreens even if you're having to use your whole hand at the same time, even if you have significant tremors or weakness. And this comes with a series of free services that we provide through the product, like automatic backup, that Support Studio, and our support system, where people can reach us anytime and get personal assistance with their family. So now I want to talk about the difference it makes, so the difference it's made so far to people around the world. Well, I'm very happy to say that we've got thousands of users now in 30 countries around the world, and the stories that have come back have been universally pretty moving. It is not an unusual day where we all tear up in the office and have a big sort of sniffly hug with one another. And I'll tell you about just a few of those users as a window into what the larger population is like. This is a young man named Tyler. Tyler was a client at a rehab hospital when we went to visit him, and up until this point, he'd been using what you can see here on his wheelchair, which is a series of pieces of paper that have words and phrases, just like I showed you in that slide. He used it very effectively, but the challenge is you need to have someone that knows what you're trying to do and can interpret it. So we put down, in this case, our app on an iPad in front of him, and he took to it immediately. He was thumbing through all of the different directories and words and phrases on it, and what he went then and did, and this is the first time he'd done it in his life, was he went to the cafe that was just outside where he was in this hospital, and he ordered his mom a French vanilla coffee, which we bought that he ordered. And it was the first time that he had ever actually been able to order something for another person out loud and be understood in a commercial situation. And since then, he's used it in all kinds of contexts, at school, at camp, and he's one of our most proficient users. This is a man named Bill. Bill was actually our very first user. He's just like you or I in any way, and he was a great engineer at Ontario Hydro, planning some of their power line and siting for those types of processes, until he had a stroke 8 years ago on the subway in Toronto. And that left him with a speech disability, but not a disability that affected his cognition. And so he came to us looking for a communication aid that could better serve him. And now he uses our apps on his phone as he goes about his day in order to communicate on a huge range of topics. And he's got pictures and phrases about his family, his grandchildren, his entire biography, and he's an amazing communicator, and again, one of our best users. Another great example, this is sort of a smaller one, which is our community director had a cousin named Adam, and Adam is on the autism spectrum. And what that means in practice is, in his case, that he doesn't often volunteer independent choices and communicate his wants and desires. He often doesn't say that much, or what he says is rather repetitive. So when they have their Passover Seder, usually people are passing him things, but he's not asking for them. And last Passover was the first time that he was able to use our apps in order to have a whole menu there that he was using essentially to order what he wanted and ask for people at the Seder and participate more fully, which is really cool. Another great example was that of a high school for kids with special needs. But what they did is they used our apps in order to carry out their craft sale. So they were using our apps in order to communicate the prices, the names of the different objects, who made them to people that would come by, and what they wound up raising money for was for special needs equipment that was then used by their own class. So a pretty cool cycle there. And it's also the ways that have used it have been really fantastic. We had one user, a guy named Mitch, and he had a stroke and had aphasia, but he was very concerned, not of himself, but actually about his wife, who's diabetic, that he wouldn't be able to take care of her the way he once had. And so he actually uses our apps to communicate with her and in conjunction with her, and also sometimes on her behalf, when she goes to her doctor's visits. So even though he's the one, nominally, with the disability, he's actually there helping his wife get her medical care, which is kind of a really cool way to bring it full circle. We have a mother who uses our apps in order to take trips to the mall with her daughter who's on the autism spectrum, and they use it primarily to decide what really terrible sugary snack or beverage they're going to have that day. But it's a wonderful interaction that they get to have through our products. And this is my favorite one. When I mentioned there being a lot of sniffly stories, this is one of the early ones. The first week we were on the market, we had a woman call us at the office and ask to speak with me. And I picked up the phone, and she started crying very quickly on the phone. And I said, you know, what's wrong? And she says, no, nothing was wrong. It's just that my daughter, for the first time in her life, asked for me by name. And when I came, she said she loved me out loud. And I'd never heard her say that out loud. And I start crying, and everyone in the office starts crying, and it was a wonderful day. But these are the kind of things that are enabled by this product. And this has been true for thousands of users now in countries around the world. I also want to leave you with a quote. This sums up a lot of how we feel about it, and a lot of how we feel it's going to continue to make an impact in the world. This is from Glenn Murray when he was the Ontario Minister of Research and Innovation, and he had this to say. He said, quote, "This is transformative. This is something that will fully enfranchise people. This is human rights technology as much as it is voice technology. This is an enabling, barrier-breaking piece of science that's really critically important and will make a huge difference in so many people's lives." And that's very much how we feel about it. So although we're a business that is essential to enabling education opportunities in employment, and to fight the kind of social stigma and isolation that tends to follow people with speech disabilities. So we're a business, but we're also an advocacy organization. And so I guess to round off, I'd like to tell you some brief lessons that we think we've learned in our first 2 years in operation that hopefully will be valuable in what you do. So the first thing is I think it's really crucial to form an opinion about your market. A lot of people, when you ask them what they do, they define it in terms of the genre in which they work. I work in assistive technology, would be my case. Or, I work in environmental products, for example. And oftentimes, by defining themselves just in terms of the genre in which they work, they don't really express an opinion about what they're doing that's different and the change that they're trying to make in that area, if at all. In our case, we formed some really strong opinions early on that we've really stuck to. And these are some of the opinions that you've seen throughout the talk. Opinions like people with disabilities should have products that are as best designed as the best designed products in the world. That you should try and have innovative technologies that can make their lives easier, help them communicate faster. That these products should be affordable and democratic and accessible to the largest possible group of people and not a very small number because of price or availability. And a lot of people shy away from forming these opinions because they worry that they're divisive, that they will be perceived as being on one side or another of a particular issue. But what we found is being an opinionated company has actually attracted people to us. It's attracted great employees to us, it's attracted great interest to us, and people like the fact that we're passionate and have an opinion that's different from the consensus opinion in our field. The second thing is I would suggest to think of yourself not just as a business person, but also as an advocate for your customers. So in our case, we absolutely engage in a financial transaction. We've got a product, people buy it and they use it, and that's what supports the company. It's very much like a traditional business in that way. But we also see ourselves as advocates for the success of our consumers socially, because our products very directly enable their success in a number of areas in their life, but also we see ourselves as lobbying and advocating for the greater inclusion of people with speech disabilities and a greater understanding of speech disabilities and the technologies that are available for them. And that advocacy has been great for us in two ways. One is it's good for the soul, which is it's wonderful and it's very gratifying to us. But the second is it makes us have a much more direct and personal connection with our users than competing companies, because we really express a very deep care and concern for the well-being of all of our customers and people who might one day be our customers. And the final thing that I'd leave you with is the idea that you should try and also sell concepts as well as products. Oftentimes when people launch a new service or a product, they focus, because this is how they got into it, very particularly on the technology and the details of it. So they might step through all of the various features, the parameters, how much it costs, where you get it, that sort of thing, and ultimately leave it just at that surface level. But what we found has been really useful is that when we go to clients and hospitals and schools and families, that we're selling them really on two things. One is our products, which are great and are what we're very proud of, but also a series of concepts. Concepts like this technology shouldn't be just the purview of 1 in 10 people that come through your school. This technology should be easier to use than it currently has been for you. That you can use it in different ways, that you don't have to accept the status quo in your organization, and that you can try a new technology and have it be a great thing for you and your clients or yourself. And so this idea for us is that there's a renaissance in the assistive technology industry. So when we talk about what we do, we talk about our products, but we talk also about this social movement. And that's been very, very important because we're advocating for a future world in which products like ours are really central to what people with speech disabilities do. And that's great for business, but it's also great for fueling social progress in that area. So in essence, that's MyVoice in the first 2 years. That's some of what we've learned, and I hope it'll be useful in what you undertake in the future. So I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and please feel free to visit our website and learn more. Thanks a lot.